A very easy way to do A/B testing is to simply, if you selected benefit one as being your first email and benefit two as being your follow-up, I would say use those two emails and test them as first email as A/B testing. Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Jeremy, founder of QuickMail.io.
Hey, and this is Jack from emailsthatsell.com.
Hey, Jack, just before we start, I've been doing some thinking lately. You know, our podcast won't be legit until we have a sponsor, right?
Okay, but haven't we been turning down sponsors?
I know, but it's hard to recommend something you and I don't use often, and we're already promoting the crap out of our services.
Fair point, but what about the course we just released? Wouldn't you recommend that to our listeners?
Yeah, for sure I would. All right, so how would we start?
Well, for starters, I wouldn't mention that it took us over a year and 3 trips to Japan and Switzerland to record the thing.
All right, let's not do that. But at minimum, I would want to mention where they can find the course. Like, let's put it to, I don't know, course.quickmail.io. Would that work for you?
It works, and then I could share what a few of those early students had to say about it. Like the one from Damien, who said it was by far the best course on cold outbound I've ever taken. Or what did Chris say? The week on sales research and targeting prospects blew my mind. Yeah, we definitely want that in there.
Yeah, I like it. It's kind of too easy. You know, people always say nice things when they get results. And at some point, we're going to have to come up with some hard sell copywriting materials of our own. And you know, I'm not that great at that. So I don't know, what would you put on a page?
Okay, how about this? Imagine that instead of getting ignored by prospects day after day, you could just follow a course that shows you how to book meetings with dream clients and automate the entire outbound process so you can focus on closing deals and scaling your company. Plus, there's that money back guarantee and the 8 modules and the bonus podcast interviews. But so far, so good?
Yeah, I like it, man. But you know, I like your style. So anyway, all right, it's getting a bit late. So can we podcast now and review that later?
Yeah, but at least promise me that course.quickmail.io is finally live and people can finally try out the course right now.
Yeah, sure. I already put it live, and just so you know, I added that special price we discussed about for our podcast listener, and then we can leave it here until, you know, we're happy with the landing page. Sounds fair enough?
Yeah, let's do it. Can you run an A/B test if you have a few hundred prospects in a campaign? Ask any data scientist or savvy marketer, and they'll tell you no. Why? You need lots of data to have confidence that you're actually picking the real winner. So what's a cold emailer to do? In this episode, Jeremy and I explore this question and leave you with a reliable process for testing low-volume email campaigns using qualitative feedback, inbound data, and a few other testing hacks you can use right now. Enjoy.
So, what are we going to talk about today, Jack?
Should we still A/B test our cold emails and really any other small volume campaign?
You listened to our show of last week, didn't you?
That's right. And I got a little bit disheartened, but now I've rethought it and we need to revisit this. So first off, what's the problem with A/B testing a cold email campaign? Why is that an issue? Well, it comes down to when we interviewed our last marketing guest who basically told us, as you are testing landing pages, for example, you need to have a certain number of visitors before you can declare a winner. And when I asked...
With confidence.
With confidence, exactly right, with statistical significance. But with cold email, we don't have that luxury to have thousands and thousands of impressions of email views. So what do?
Yeah, well, the question is, do we need those 1,000 views? So...
Do we need, and here's the danger. We run 2 different email campaigns. One has a 10% response rate, one has a 20% response rate. And after sending to 100 prospects, we declare a winner and we move on. However, we just picked the wrong one because they weren't statistically significant. That's the danger. And that is a real problem. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, especially if you don't have a lot of data to go on, to base that test on. So that's the problem when you are talking about testing cold email campaigns, because Jeremy, I don't know, tell me a ballpark how many prospects you put per campaign.
That's a good question. I think I go about 200 most of the time.
Yeah.
I think like small batches. And, stop me if I'm wrong, but you're also going for low volume, high personalization, which makes,
Yeah.
A/B testing harder to some extent.
Yeah. And if I ever find myself with, say, 500 prospects in one group, there's a very good chance I'll split that group up into 2 or 3 parts and write different campaigns for each different sub segment within that larger group so that the message is a little bit more relevant. So it's nice to be relevant. It's nice to be ultra personalized. However, for testing, traditional marketer would say that's just not enough data in order to test with. So might as well stop doing that. And what I want to bring up is this question right here. Should we just stop testing? Let's hash this out.
Well, those marketing shenanigans, you should just ignore them. When marketers are testing, they're just figuring out if that person is going to website, taking action and so on, but they don't actually have any real feedback. So let me give you an example. If, for example, you're starting a campaign, you're splitting with your 100, let's say 100 prospect, then you get 20 responses on each of them. The 20 response from one are telling you something positive, and the 20 other response are telling you something negative. I guess the marketer will just see like, okay, it's this one or this one. And they sort of like see that in binary. But in cold email, those negative response will actually potentially contain really super valuable information to actually help you improve your campaign, right? Like an example will be like, oh, I'm sorry, we don't deal with international teams or whatever. Then that's an interesting information, especially if it comes 20 times or even 5 times. Maybe that's something you may want to put in your email. So you get way more qualitative feedback. It's a bit like you stop those people visiting your website, you break into their house and you tell them like, why did you abandon my page? Then you'll be able to have like a qualitative, sort of like conversation. And you don't have that with the marketing guys.
You're right. And we're picking on traditional marketers here, but it is a fundamentally different game than, let's say, optimizing a landing page. And I'll give you the sort of alluded to it just there, but there is a significant difference between collecting data that is nothing but clicks and conversions and the qualitative replies that come in from these actual human beings that saw your words and gave you feedback, both positive and negative. Now, that's a marketer's dream to have everybody who interacts with a landing page share an opinion, what they thought, and even better, why they did not choose to convert. But as cold emailers, we have that, which I will say, for the record, changes the decisions that we can make based on a campaign with only 100 prospects. A marketer won't be able to do anything with that data. A cold emailer, thanks to responses, both positive and negative, will be able to make smart business decisions based on those small groups of prospects.
Yes. And if we go back to, marketing, an interesting and funny thing as well is that sometimes they take the wrong conclusion. Like they think it's because they change the color of a button, for example. And if they go with too low volume, then effectively that could be pretty, false simply and as an assumption. But if you're sending something and then people say, I don't like purple buttons, then they don't like purple buttons. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So
exactly.
You get that big difference. And therefore, I think you don't need as much, visitor in a sense or opens or views of your emails in order to figure out like, am I going into the right direction or not? One thing I will say is I really like our last interview because Brian was suggesting to actually use the number of replies instead of number of emails sent. And I really like that. So rather than aiming like, I'm going to send 100 emails and then compare the two, it's actually getting 100 replies, 100 replies. But I think you could do even maybe with less, as long as there is valid and interesting qualitative feedback, you could all, aim for 50 responses, right? 50-50. That means you need to send a certain number of emails. And of course, if your reply rate is rubbish, then you're not in a good shape.
Okay, so I have a real life cold email example from our agency last month, a recent good reason to keep testing given what Brian had to say about achieving statistical significance. So we set up a campaign, and the first email, I'm just talking about email number 1. I'll ignore the follow-ups and their responses for this example. But the first email we tested had a 9.8% reply rate after 100 prospects. So we got 9 replies, more or less, right? And we looked at those 9 replies and were able to put a B variation that after 100 prospects got a 20% response rate just on the first touch. And the overwhelming majority of those were asking for meetings. This isn't like a case study to tout anything. It's just cut and dry. That's what can happen if you take the responses that you're getting and do something with that to better inform your next variation. Okay, so we essentially doubled the response rate from 9.8 to 20% just after getting 8 replies from that first variation. And FYI, the campaign itself, 4 touches, has a 30.4% response rate. So woot woot, we're excited about that. But yeah, like that, those 8 replies were all we needed. There was, I think, 5 replies that had the same theme. And I won't get into what it was. It doesn't matter. We just took that theme and addressed it in the email. And right away, we more than doubled the response rate for that single email with just 8 replies. So I don't even think you need to shoot for 20 replies. I think there's learnings that can come from every couple responses that you get, especially if there's a common pattern. Great opportunity to address an objection before somebody even writes in.
This is a really interesting thing. I think the information here that we need to keep in mind is that you more or less like double your response rate. And I think if it was like, 40% extra or 20% extra, the greater the difference is, or the more drastic the difference is, the more confidence you're going to have into, yes, okay, this is a winner or not. But you do need responses, because I tell you what, if you were getting 0 responses on one campaign after sending 100 prospects and the other one 2, 3, you still couldn't actually really call a winner, right? Because those 3 could have been on the other group. So it's very difficult to figure out. But in your case, that's a good call. Definitely.
Yeah, it was a large enough lift to say, yep, we're onto something here, right? Maybe not a bullseye right away, but certainly an indication we're on the right track here.
Yeah, that makes sense. So my personal recommendation will be to always have an A/B testing running. And you have to be still careful about, how you're actually doing it. So my favorite way is to have 2 versions running all the time. And every week or every couple of weeks, depending on how many replies you get, then you actually declare a winner and you keep it, and then you create a second one. But you always only have like 2 at the same time. Otherwise, the volume required will be pretty high. And then the other thing you need to be careful is when you're doing those experiments. Because let's say, for example, that you're doing a campaign that will resonate more during Halloween week and not so much versus, in the other weeks. So you run the risk of going away from a potentially really good campaign just because, it was the Halloween week and that one resonated more than the other one. So always also be conscious about, external events or time on the year when you're actually doing your test.
But if you're always running tests alongside each other, won't that cancel out the timing of the year?
To some extent, but let's say, for example, you got version A and then you got version B. Version A was always a sort of like winner, and then you start a new version B during Halloween. Version B performs better, so you drop version A and then you do version B versus version C. But it could have been that version A actually re-perform again better after, Halloween. So you have to be slightly careful about that. Otherwise, you will move away from a good sequence. So I will give them like a few weeks in order to really figure out.
Yeah. Okay, so we should round out this episode with some hard recommendations on how long we should let a test run.
Good point.
But I think, forgive me if I'm nagging here, but I doubt you really mean Halloween will impact a campaign. I don't know too many businesses that would operate differently, but I'm thinking maybe fiscal year ends or Q1 begins or...
Yeah, for sure.
Right around tax season or right around a slow season if you happen to be, let's say, a summer kind of business, right? Like maybe just know your market.
Cyclical businesses may actually, have a huge impact for sure.
Okay. We haven't even spoken about testing for deliverability's sake. And I think
that's right.
Yeah, that's on your list, huh?
I should have put it first, of course, being the technical guy here.
Yeah.
But yeah, of course, spam filter don't like, seeing the same stuff again and again.
So here's the danger. You know, the case study I mentioned where we doubled the response rate, eventually that winner is going to lose steam. So we are testing against it right now, even though it's clearly doing well. We're putting a pretty different sounding email against it in order to keep the variety of the content coming out of that inbox broad. And just as a disclaimer, every single of these messages has a custom intro sentence that we're using in order to improve the variation even further and also just connect with a human being better.
Yeah, this is interesting about the custom intro is when you're going to get a reply, make sure it's not so connected to your custom intro, because otherwise you're going to sort of A/B test the wrong thing. You're A/B testing actually your intro versus the actual message.
But both variations use the same custom intro sentence. So that should be apples to apples.
Oh, then that's fine.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I like that.
And I encourage you, you're listening to the show. It means you care enough about cold email to at least test what happens to your response rate when you add that personalized sentence for each prospect. Every single person that gets a message from you, they deserve that personalization, if nothing other than for better response rate and easier deliverability. But again, let's come back to what testing does to inboxing.
Yeah, so basically, if too many people flag your message as spam, then Google or Microsoft Outlook will recognize that this type of message is not really wanted. And so therefore will, put it to the trash bin. And of course, if you vary your messaging with different one, then that's going to be difficult for the spam filter to really think like, oh, this is this type of message that is not, performing well in a sense. And I think this is very important as well. As a recommendation, I will say your A/B testing should be really drastically different, because if you put them too close, then there is a higher risk of, like if you test one word, of course, you're going to need like massive amount of volume, to figure out, is it hello or is it hi that performs better? Those sort of things are small optimization that probably shouldn't go there. But spam filter will really look at, paragraph-based differences, like structure of the email is a bit different. Like, is there an extra paragraph here, or is it like a long sentence there? Is it an image there? And so the more you can vary drastically also the overlay of the email, the better it is. So if you have your custom intro that is always one line, maybe try custom intro with 2 lines on one thing, just try to vary a bit the structure, because it makes things so much harder.
Okay. So I'm interested what you're going to say to this question. But if the reason we're A/B testing in this instance is for nothing other than mixing up the messages that come out of the inbox so the spam filters know that there's a lot of variety.
Yep.
Why, when I arrive at a winning campaign, when I have a single email that gets a 20% response rate, why don't I just start a second campaign, Jeremy, that just thanks people for a great podcast and putting out good content, as a second campaign with totally different wording that is never going to be reported as spam? Would that accomplish the same goal?
I think it could, but it doesn't mean that your first initial outreach campaign won't be flagged as spam at some point, because I think, like you mentioned, there is diminishing return. So at some point, this will get overused. But if you actually, let's say it gets overused after 3 weeks, depending on the number of prospects you're actually sending. If you have like maybe an A/B testing, then maybe you sort of like double the time expense.
Good point.
The time length of this sequence, because you basically have less prospect going on each of them.
So how do we know when to kill a variation? How do we know if it's getting into trouble with deliverability, or even if it's just not really winning?
I got a few thoughts, but I'd like to hear you first, Jack, on this one, actually.
So my theory is whenever you get enough responses, both positive and negative, to inform your next variation, you should write that next variation and remove the one that is the weakest performer. Even if it means you only have 8 responses per variant, you're making an early call. I think it's time to introduce another variation now that you're a little bit smarter based on collecting more feedback from your audience.
Yeah, I really like this recommendation. My thought is slightly a different angle. I would say that it depends where you are in your campaign. So let me explain that a little bit. If you are at the very beginning of your campaign, let's say you start with a new client, or you have a new product, or you have a new type of messages, you basically start. And at that point, one of the big advice that I give people is rather than putting like one email too long, try to split it into multiple benefits and use those benefits as follow-ups, for example. A very easy way to do A/B testing is to simply, if you selected benefit 1 as being your first email and benefit 2 as being your follow-up, I would say use those 2 emails and test them as first email as A/B testing. So in one, you're actually putting maybe saving time as the first, benefit, like, hey, we've saved times of the last 100 companies that join us on average by 40%, whatever. And then the other benefit will be like maybe cost savings, like, hey, we've been able to save cost up to 40% on, and then make those two actually your A/B testing, because it's a beginning. You don't really know which one is going to resonate the most with your A/B testing. And I think that's a valid way of starting your A/B testing naturally, just basically using what you would have used as a follow-up as, your first email as well. And then after that, after you'd sort of like decided who's the winner you're going to start with, then you can either try with different benefits if you had like 5, 6 different benefits, or maybe it's time based on the feedback that you're starting to get to sort of like spin off a new A/B testing, like you just mentioning, which I really like.
So maybe you have, in this example, let's say 3 campaigns, 3 sequences. And in each sequence, are you recommending changing the order around of the value proposition mentioned?
I would say maybe not even have a follow-up on the very first one. So you have like your first email, then you have like 3 days delay, for example. And then you leave some room for adding the next potential email. And then for the first email, you're going to put those 3 different A/B testing for different benefits.
Okay.
And then you're going to see, what seems to be working there.
Because the idea is you want the most compelling benefit in the first email.
That's right. I know we don't recommend it, Jack, but you could simply have a bump email. If you're thinking like, oh, I really don't know what I could put as a follow-up because I use them all, my benefits, in the first emails type of things.
Right.
Well, if you really feel like that, just use a small bump email. That's okay. And third one, do the breakup email. This is probably not the best practice and so on. But if you're doing that in very low volume, just to get some information as to what people resonate with, and like I mentioned, it's not like they reply or they didn't reply. You got way more information than that. You got the qualitative feedback as to telling why they replied. Then I think that works as a first level campaign kind of thing to reach quickly a point where people are reacting to your emails.
So speaking of reaching the point where people are reacting to your emails quickly, something that we haven't mentioned, but this is great advice for anyone, especially if they're new in their market, is create a sequence that is really high up in the sales process. You're not even mentioning benefits or anything about your product or service, and just try and find out more about what it is they're working on. And if you give a commonality that, let's say, a very clear explanation of why you're looking to meet with them, and it's not to sell or pitch them, you may find that you can get a lot of people on the phone and just find out what their pain points are at the moment so that you can inform your cold emails better. That may be almost a crucial step one for anybody who's foreign to their market to really just, as an email copywriter, I pick up the phone and I call customers of clients in order to figure out what it was that got them to purchase. What caught their attention? Why did they choose them over competition? And let that power the genesis of your cold email campaigns. So you don't have to guess, right?
Absolutely love this. And if we go in that direction, I think you should always keep your ears open from marketing and from sales, because they may have some interesting thing that was working suddenly, or they could hear always the same thing, salespeople trying to close, or they say like they would have get it, but they didn't know that, we were doing XYZ or stuff like that. And that seems to be very important for them. I keep getting this sort of objection, but it's not even a point for us. So it's kind of weird we're getting this objection kind of thing. Maybe you can actually put it into your copy, or maybe basically try to involve other departments because they may have some interesting input that will help create a better campaign.
I was speaking with a founder, and he says that he always starts inbound first. And once they've gotten enough inbound leads to take a look at what content performed really well and the type of buyers that they actually ended up with, then they start outbound, because they have data that tells them these kinds of people are purchasing thanks to this kind of content, and they can work backwards and just pretty much come right out of the gate with a successful campaign if they know how to write cold emails well.
Yeah, that's really cool. One thing that I'm doing, I got this massive cold email article, like quickmail.io/cold-email, just like a shameless plug here. After all, it's your show. And on top of it, there is some form to sort of like register if, I do massive changes and so on, which I do sometimes. And I got that on a few other websites. But one thing that is cool is that it starts automatically a sequence on Quickmail. So people just get that sort of like 101 email from me, just telling them like, hey, cool, since you're downloading that, maybe you will also be interested in XYZ. And I just always end up with a question, like outreach type of email. So, and when they're replying, then I always ask them things like, by the way, are you using Quickmail? I just go straight with that. And I've been surprised how well this is perceived. People are already coming attracted by the sort of like cold email space and so on. I just ask them point blank. I say like, are you using Quickmail? Or did you contemplate using Quickmail or stuff like that? And it's been leading to quite a few sales nicely like that, because people are just nicely coming into your thing from the inbound, but I basically apply the outbound stuff on this. And obviously I may be testing that, but it's cool.
Brilliant. So let me understand that when somebody comes to the article, they opt in for something. Once they opt in, they'll get a message from you. Is that right?
Yeah, plus a CTA.
Cool.
And the CTA is a question. So basically I say, hey, thanks, here's your, resource. And then I give a CTA, like, tell me a little bit more about XYZ. And when they spend the effort to tell me about XYZ, then I go ahead and then ask them about point blank.
Cool.
By the way, are you using Quickmail or are you planning on using Quickmail?
Brilliant.
And people just reply very positively to that.
Yeah, I think the greatest value you can have in cold email is learning quickly what works. And if you can use inbound content to help speed that up, more power to you. The only downside is not all of us have the luxury of lots of inbound data in order to make decisions on. So sometimes we have to start with outbound. And if that's the case, again, if you want to speed things up, pick up the phone. So with that, let's round out this episode, Jeremy, and talk about definite recommendations from Jack and Jeremy with regard to testing. When should we test? When should we kill a test? And yeah, let's start there. What comes to your mind, Jeremy? When should we test? Always. Okay, done.
Always have at least 2 variations running at the same time.
Per touch.
Per touch. Good point here. Per touch.
Okay.
We agree on that one?
We're agreed.
And also make sure you don't do more than 5. I've seen something ridiculous like 12 different, variation on stars. Like, I think that's over the board.
Overkill.
Like,
Keep it to 2.
How can you find 12 equally interesting, A/B testing to run? Nah, I don't think so.
They must have heard advice about varying your content. Could be as simple as that. All right. And so when do we kill one of the tests? My recommendation, as you heard, as soon as you collect enough responses to power an intelligent variation that you haven't thought of yet. Okay. So there's your testing prescription from Jack and Jeremy. Go ahead and do that. And you'll not only up your response rate and the number of positive leads that you get out of it, but also you'll keep that deliverability aspect of your campaign nice and healthy because you've got so much variety.
That's right. Thanks, Jack. Great cast.
Jeremy, as always. See ya.
Okay, so now you've heard of views on cold email testing, I'll leave you with just one last thought. Make sure you always keep a copy of every experiment you ran, along with the stats, so you can bring new team members or agencies up to speed on what worked and what didn't.
Hey, cold emailer.
Yeah, you.
If you got some value from this episode, give us a high vibe by sharing a 2-sentence review on iTunes.
Or Stitcher, or TuneIn, that works too.
It's a quick way to help other growth-minded folks like us find this podcast
so they can send awesome emails
and make everyone's inbox a better place. Thanks.